People see the BMW R1250 GS flying through mud, climbing mountains, crossing deserts, and surviving roads that look impossible for normal motorcycles. But almost nobody stops to think about where this machine actually comes from. Because this is not one of those bikes that feels mass-produced like a random object sitting on a showroom floor. Every part of it looks engineered by people who genuinely expected somebody to ride this thing across an entire continent without mercy. And that is exactly why the factory behind it is so fascinating. This is not just another motorcycle assembly line where robots throw parts together as fast as possible. The level of precision inside BMW's German factory is honestly insane. Tiny measurements matter. Microscopic errors matter. Even the sound of the engine gets tested like somebody is tuning a musical instrument instead of building an adventure bike. And once you see how much work goes into one single R1250 GS, the price tag suddenly starts making a lot more sense. The crazy thing is the GS was never supposed to become this massive global icon in the first place. Back in the day, adventure motorcycles were a much smaller category, and most people thought big touring bikes and off-road machines should stay separate because combining them sounded ridiculous. But BMW basically looked at that idea and said, what if we ignore the rules completely? And somehow, they created a motorcycle that became the dream bike for travelers, off-road riders, long-distance tourers, and honestly, people who just wanted to feel unstoppable riding to work on a Tuesday morning. Today, the GS is one of the most recognized motorcycles on Earth. You can spot one from far away just from the shape alone. That massive stance, the boxer engine sticking out from both sides, the aggressive front design, it looks less like a motorcycle and more like a machine built for surviving the end of the world. Inside the German factory, the process starts long before the bike even touches the assembly line. Massive shipments of raw materials arrive every day, and every single component gets checked with brutal attention to detail. BMW does not play around with tolerances. If a part is even slightly off, it does not move forward. And what makes the whole thing interesting is how clean and organized everything feels. Most people imagine factories as loud, chaotic places with sparks flying everywhere and workers screaming over machinery. But this place almost feels surgical. Bright lights, perfectly arranged equipment, engines lined up with insane precision. Workers moving with routines so smooth, it honestly looks choreographed. And the engine section especially feels different because the boxer engine is basically the soul of the GS. That horizontally opposed twin-cylinder design is one of the main reasons the bike feels so unique when riding. The balance, the torque delivery, the low center of gravity, BMW protected that identity for decades because riders instantly recognize it. Then comes the part that surprises a lot of people. Even with all the advanced robotics inside the factory, humans still play a huge role in the process. People sometimes assume luxury engineering means robots do everything now. But there are sections where trained technicians manually inspect components with ridiculous concentration. One tiny mistake inside the transmission or engine assembly could turn into a disaster thousands of miles later when somebody is crossing a remote mountain road with no help nearby. That pressure changes everything. The workers know these bikes are not just commuting machines. Some owners take these motorcycles through snowstorms, deserts, rainforests, rocky trails, and roads that barely even qualify as roads anymore. So the durability standards become extremely serious. And honestly, watching somebody carefully assemble components by hand while knowing the bike might eventually end up crossing Africa or South America makes the entire process feel more personal than people expect. One of the most fascinating parts of the factory is how the frame and suspension systems come together, because this is where the GS really starts transforming from separate metal parts into something recognizable. The telelever front suspension alone already makes the bike stand out from most motorcycles on the road. BMW engineers designed it differently because they wanted more stability during braking and rough terrain riding, and when you see the suspension components being assembled, you realize just how overbuilt this thing actually is. Nothing looks fragile. Everything looks designed to survive punishment. Even the robotic welding systems look absurdly precise, with sparks firing in perfect patterns while giant mechanical arms move like they have memorized every motion down to the millimeter. And then workers step in afterward, inspecting weld points manually because BMW still wants human eyes verifying critical areas instead of relying entirely on automation. That combination of robotic precision and human inspection is a huge reason these bikes built such a strong reputation worldwide. And then there is the testing phase, which honestly feels like BMW trusting absolutely nobody until the motorcycle proves itself. Every engine gets checked. Electronics get tested repeatedly. Brakes, lighting systems, throttle response, onboard software, suspension calibration, everything goes through verification. Modern GS motorcycles are loaded with technology now. Riding modes, traction control, cornering abs, dynamic suspension systems, giant TFT displays, radar systems on newer models. This thing is basically a spaceship compared to older adventure bikes. But the funny part is, BMW still has to make all that technology feel natural to riders who might be deep in the wilderness, covered in mud and exhaustion. That balance between luxury touring comfort and rugged off-road capability is what made the GS legendary in the first place. And keeping that balance, while adding more electronics every generation, is probably one of the hardest things engineers deal with behind the scenes. The engine startup section might honestly be one of the most satisfying parts of the entire factory. After all the assembly work, inspections, calibrations, and testing, hearing the Boxer engine finally come alive feels different. It is not just noise. The engine has this deep mechanical personality to it. The bike shakes slightly with that signature Boxer movement, and suddenly, the machine feels real for the first time. You go from seeing random parts and robotic systems to hearing an actual motorcycle ready to hit the road. And workers immediately start monitoring data the moment the engine fires up, because they are listening for abnormalities most normal riders would never even notice. Tiny sounds matter. Tiny vibrations matter. One unusual reading can stop the process instantly. That level of obsession is why people trust these motorcycles for insanely long journeys across dangerous terrain. And what really separates the BMW R1250 GS from ordinary motorcycles is the amount of punishment the company expects this thing to survive before it even reaches a customer. Most bikes are designed mainly around comfort, speed, or daily commuting. The GS gets engineered like somebody already assumes the owner is going to abuse it in the most extreme conditions possible. That mentality changes everything inside the factory. Components are stress-tested again and again because BMW knows riders are going to overload these bikes with luggage, crash bars, camping gear, passengers, extra fuel tanks, and then still ride them through freezing rain halfway across another country. And somehow, the GS still has to feel smooth enough for highway touring afterward. That is the insane balancing act happening behind the scenes. One moment engineers are thinking about rocky mountain trails. The next moment they are focused on rider comfort during 10-hour highway rides. It is basically two completely different motorcycles trapped inside one machine. The paint and finishing section is another area where the factory suddenly feels less industrial and more artistic, because this is the moment the motorcycle finally starts looking premium instead of mechanical. Giant unfinished metal surfaces slowly become the aggressive adventure bike people recognize online and in dealerships. The color options, the detailing, the GS branding, the tank finishes, everything gets applied with ridiculous care, because BMW knows appearance matters just as much as engineering for buyers spending this much money. And unlike cheaper motorcycles where small imperfections sometimes slide through unnoticed, premium bikes get inspected differently. Tiny paint inconsistencies, alignment problems, or surface flaws immediately stand out under factory lighting. So workers inspect every angle carefully while robotic systems handle the precision spraying. Watching the glossy surfaces come together under bright lights almost feels satisfying in a weird way, because the motorcycle finally starts looking alive instead of unfinished. Then comes one of the most underrated parts of the process: software calibration. A lot of people still imagine motorcycles as purely mechanical machines, but modern GS bikes are packed with electronics everywhere. The onboard systems are constantly communicating with each other. Suspension sensors, throttle response systems, riding modes, traction control, AB settings, display systems. The bike is basically thinking while you ride it. And BMW engineers spend massive amounts of time making sure all those systems feel smooth instead of distracting. Because adventure riders do not want technology that feels annoying or complicated while crossing difficult terrain. Everything needs to react naturally and instantly. If traction control cuts power too aggressively during an off-road climb, riders notice immediately. If suspension adjustments feel delayed, riders notice immediately. So behind the scenes, there is an entire world of calibration happening that most owners never even think about while riding. One thing that surprises people is how global the GS audience became over the years. These motorcycles leave the German factory and end up literally everywhere. European mountain roads, African deserts, Asian highways, American backcountry trails, icy Scandinavian routes. The same motorcycle platform somehow adapts to completely different riding cultures around the world. And BMW understands that while building them. Engineers know one owner might use the bike mainly for luxury touring, while another rider is preparing for brutal off-road expeditions across remote terrain. That is why the GS has this strange reputation where it feels premium and rugged at the same time. Most motorcycles lean heavily toward one identity. The GS somehow lives in both worlds simultaneously. And honestly, that identity became part of its myth. Riders do not just buy the motorcycle for transportation anymore. They buy into the image of freedom, exploration, and the idea that the road basically never has to end. The final inspection area might actually be the most intense section in the entire factory, because this is where the motorcycle either passes or gets sent back for corrections. Every detail gets checked one last time before the bike officially leaves production. Workers inspect alignment, electronics, fitment, panel quality, lighting systems, controls, and mechanical performance with almost obsessive focus. And there is something satisfying about watching a fully completed GS standing there under inspection lights looking ready for adventure before it has even touched a public road yet. It already looks like it belongs somewhere remote and cinematic, like it should already be covered in dust crossing some endless mountain road at sunrise. That is part of the emotional appeal BMW mastered with these bikes. Even sitting still inside a factory, the GS somehow looks like it wants to leave immediately and disappear into another country. Another thing that makes the factory process so interesting is the amount of testing BMW does before a single motorcycle is allowed to leave Germany. People think luxury brands survive because of marketing, but motorcycles like the GS survive because riders put them through absolute torture in real life. And BMW knows that reputation can disappear fast if reliability drops even slightly. That is why durability testing becomes almost obsessive behind the scenes. Prototype engines run for ridiculous amounts of time under heavy loads. Suspension systems get hammered repeatedly. Frames are tested under stress conditions that simulate years of aggressive riding. Engineers are basically trying to predict every terrible situation a rider might experience before the customer ever touches the bike. Imagine designing something knowing somebody will eventually ride it through freezing temperatures, deep mud, endless highways, rocky climbs, heavy rain, and maybe even crash it, and it still needs to keep moving afterward. That pressure changes how everything gets built. The Boxer engine itself deserves attention, because this thing is one of the biggest reasons the GS became legendary worldwide. Most motorcycles have engines positioned vertically, but BMW kept this horizontally opposed twin-cylinder layout for decades because it completely changes the riding experience. And when you watch the engine assembly process inside the factory, you realize BMW treats it almost like heritage engineering. Workers install components with insane accuracy because the Boxer engine is not just about power. It defines the entire personality of the motorcycle. The low center of gravity makes the bike feel balanced in ways that surprise people the first time they ride one. And then, there is the torque delivery. The GS does not scream for speed like a race bike. It pulls with this deep, effortless strength that feels made for long distances and difficult terrain. That personality starts inside the factory long before the motorcycle reaches open roads. What is also fascinating is how much attention gets placed on rider comfort during production. Adventure motorcycles sound exciting in theory until you realize some owners spend entire days sitting on these machines crossing countries non-stop. A motorcycle can have all the horsepower in the world, but if the riding position destroys your back after 3 hours, nobody is riding across continents on it. So BMW engineers constantly focus on ergonomics during development and production. Seat height options, handlebar positioning, wind protection, suspension tuning, vibration reduction. All these little details matter more than people realize. And inside the factory, you can see how carefully components are aligned because one small issue affects the riding experience later. The GS is supposed to feel capable without exhausting the rider. That combination is extremely difficult to achieve on a large adventure motorcycle, especially one designed to handle off-road punishment too. And then there is the electronics department, which honestly feels closer to aerospace engineering than traditional motorcycle manufacturing sometimes. Modern GS bikes are loaded with technology that older riders probably could not even imagine 20 years ago. Dynamic ride modes instantly adjust how the motorcycle behaves. Electronic suspension systems react to road conditions while riding. Advanced ABS systems monitor braking constantly. Some newer versions even include radar-assisted features that sound more like luxury cars than motorcycles. But the challenge for BMW is making all this technology invisible while riding. Riders do not want to constantly think about computers controlling everything underneath them. They want the motorcycle to feel natural, smooth, and predictable. That is why engineers spend so much time fine-tuning software responses. Tiny delays or awkward reactions would completely ruin rider confidence, especially off-road where conditions change instantly. One of the most impressive scenes inside the factory is watching the motorcycle finally move under its own power for the first time. After weeks of assembly, calibration, inspections, and testing, the completed GS rolls forward looking completely different from the scattered parts seen earlier in production. And there is this strange satisfaction in that moment, because suddenly everything connects together. The frame, engine, suspension, electronics, wheels, controls, all the separate systems finally become a real motorcycle. Workers immediately monitor how it behaves, listening carefully and checking performance data because this stage still matters massively. If something feels wrong, the bike does not move forward. And considering the price and reputation attached to the GS name, BMW cannot afford careless mistakes slipping through production. Customers buying these motorcycles expect reliability at an extremely high level. And honestly, part of the GS appeal is psychological too. Riders do not just buy this motorcycle because of horsepower numbers or technology specs. They buy the feeling attached to it. The bike represents movement, freedom, exploration, and the idea that normal roads are no longer limits anymore. That is why so many owners become emotionally attached to these machines. Some motorcycles are just transportation. The GS feels more like a tool built for experiences people remember for years. And seeing the factory process explains why owners talk about these bikes almost like living companions instead of machines. The amount of engineering and human attention inside every unit creates that connection long before the first ride even happens. Then there is the sound. People underestimate how important sound becomes in motorcycle culture until they hear certain engines in person. The Boxer engine produces this deep mechanical rhythm that riders instantly recognize. Inside the factory, technicians pay close attention during startup testing because unusual sounds can reveal problems before the bike ever reaches customers. But beyond technical inspection, the sound itself became part of the GS personality over the years. It does not sound aggressive, like a superbike screaming at maximum RPM. It sounds confident, heavy, and purposeful. Like the motorcycle is built for distance instead of showing off for 5 minutes outside a cafe. And for adventure riders especially, That character matters emotionally more than raw speed numbers ever could. The insane part is how much effort goes into details most owners will never consciously notice. Tiny alignment adjustments, wiring organization hidden behind panels, suspension calibration differences so small average riders might never identify them directly. But all those invisible details combine together into the final experience. That smoothness people describe while riding a GS does not happen accidentally. It comes from thousands of tiny decisions made during engineering and production. And when you watch the process inside the German factory, you start understanding why BMW invests so heavily into maintaining these standards instead of rushing production carelessly. And maybe that is why people become so attached to these motorcycles emotionally. Because once you see how much engineering, testing, craftsmanship, and obsession goes into every single unit, the bike stops feeling like just another expensive machine. It starts feeling purposeful. Every bolt, every weld, every system inside it was designed around the idea of going farther, surviving longer, and handling situations most motorcycles would hate. And whether somebody actually rides across continents or just rides to work every morning, that feeling still matters. The GS sells a kind of confidence that is hard to explain until you see how seriously BMW takes the entire production process from beginning to end. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because there are more insane factory productions and engineering stories coming soon, and some of them make this process look small.